Hi, welcome. In this video, I'm going to go over part 2 of assignment 9. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, and let's get started. So this is assignment 9, part 2 on vectors. So let's first things first, let's take a look at the sample output. So you're going to be doing something similar to what you did with dynamic arrays, only this time we're going to use a vector instead of a dynamic array. So you will have your crypto or bit values in a file, and you're just going to read them from a file, but instead of reading them from a file into a dynamic array, you're going to read them into a vector, and then you're going to sort them. So this is different. We didn't do sorting in the other assignment, so you're going to sort uh, the values, and then you're going to enter a value and do the same thing we did before and count how many are greater than that value, and also calculate the average. All right, so let's get started. So we're going to use vectors for this instead. We're still going to use the same input file. So our input file is going to be called bit values. So if you go on Canvas, can get the bit values file. So we're going to have the libraries we will include: IOStream for input and output, vector, algorithm for the sort function to sort the values in the vector, and fstream because we're going to be reading the values from a file. So our first function is the fill vector function. It's going to take a reference to our file in our file stream. It will take a reference to our vector. Now, arrays are automatically pointers, but vectors are not. So we're going to have to, our vector will be of type double. Vector is a template class, which means that it can use different data types. So for this case, obviously, we're going to have doubles in it. And then we're going to pass the count. This count is how many the user wants to get from the file. Once you have the values filled into your vector, you don't need to keep a count because there is a function size that's part of the vector class that will tell you how many are in there. Then we're going to pass our vector by value. We don't need to pass it by reference. We just can pass it by value. It's just a bunch of doubles, and it's going to print the values onto the screen. This right here says it makes a copy. That's because we're passing it by value. And our next function is going to sort. So we're going to make a copy in here, and we're going to sort those values that are in the copy. And then here we're going to pass our vector again here. And in this one, we're going to pass a separate vector in here for sorting. And then here we're going to pass we can call the print vector then once we sort it to print it. And here we're going to pass our original vector that's going to find out, we're going to have the user enter a number and we're going to count how many are greater than that value. So, and then we're also going to calculate the average of all of the greater values. So we have another vector that has those greater values and it's going to calculate and print the average. All right, so here's some hints to help us. We're going to come back to these hints as we're working on our code. Remember, we're going to work on one thing at a time and not continue until we work on that one thing at a time. So I've gone ahead and I have open here. I have my assignment 6. This was my dynamic array assignment. I just have this open in case I need anything to reference from it. But I'm going to start on my assignment 9. So I have the template here for part 2 of assignment 9. And I've already created my project. And I'm going to put it here in my project and get started. So let's take a look at the part 2. We have all of our functions here. We have our fill vector function. We have our print vector function. We have our sort vector function. We have our count values function, and we have our calculate average function. We're only going to do one thing at a time, so there's no reason to keep um, to try to do everything at one time. So that's why this the template is very doesn't have a lot there because we want to do one thing at a time. Obviously, the first function we're going to do is the fill vector function. I'm just going to go ahead here and open up in case there's anything long, I just don't want to have to type it. So I have my code that I can copy and paste in as we're going through these different features. So the first function is going to be the fill vector function. So we're going to implement this fill vector function. This function is going to we're going to connect to the file before we call this function. So here we can connect to the file. We also need to ask the user how many they want to read from the file. So like I said before, there isn't any reason I have to type here. So we're going to have a count here, and we're going to ask the user how many they want to get from the file. So I'm going to change that to count. So then we're going to say, how many do you want to get to the file? And we will get a count. Now, if you have a particular number of values in your file, say you have your file only contains 75, you can do a do while here. You could say do, and then you can get the count while count is less than or equal to 0. We want to get at least one number from the file, and you would tell them enter 1 through 75. Say, if you have only 75 values in your file, then you're going to continue to do this. So this is going to continue. You can add an if condition inside here also if you want to have a better user experience. But basically you're going to say, how many do you want to get from the file? If they give you a negative number or a 0, it's going to just come back here and say how many. If they give you a number greater than 75, it's going to come back and it's going to keep going until they give you a number that is in the range between 1 and 75. And here you have told them what you want, a number in the range between 1 and 75. So I recommend doing that, and I recommend now we will test it just to see, make sure our loop is working as expected. I do have some warnings here because I have some functions that are not implemented yet, but I will try to get rid of all of my warnings later. So if I enter -1, it should continue. If I enter 100, it should continue. If I enter 42, it finishes. Okay, so now that is done. So now we move on to our next issue is we need to connect to the file. Now you can also put, I'm not going to do it, but some of you we've already done enough file input that you can put in a condition to exit the program if you do not connect to the file, because obviously we cannot continue with this program if we do not connect to the file. But I'm going to assume that we connect to the file, so we're going to pass our IF stream to the file. We're going to pass our vector, which has been declared here, called bit values. It's a vector of doubles called bit values. And we're going to pass this count. This count is the count that the user says how many they want to get from the file. So I'm going to go ahead and get my code for this, and then we will talk about it. Okay, so we're not going to read directly into, so if you look at your assignment 6, when we filled our array, this was the code to fill the array. We went up to the number, and then we filled in directly into our array. And if you remember, uh, oops, the function parameter for that, so this was the function. So our fill array function took our IF stream, our array, which is already a pointer. So when you update an array inside the function, you also update the array back where it's called because it is a pointer and our size. And then we wrote a loop and we directly read in from the file that we were already connected to into the array at index 0, changed it to 1, 2, all the way up to size. In this situation, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to read into the number, and then in order to make the vector grow as expected, we're going to take that number each time we get a number. We're going to call the vector pushback function, and that's the way how a vector grows. You can't assign, even though a vector is like an array and you can use the indexes like an array, to fill the array, you want to make sure that you use this pushback function to push each item one by one into the vector. Okay, so now we can call this function. This function will take our file, which is called in, and our vector, which is called bit values. Now the bit values in main and the bit values here, it's by reference. So since it's by reference, it will be updating the same array. I mean, the same vector. And then count is going to make a copy. So the main function will have its own version of count and the fill vector function will have its own version of count. Now, the problem is we can test to make sure that it compiles and we can, uh, assume that it's working, but without printing them onto the screen, then you don't really know if it actually worked or not. So if I wanted to get 12 from the file, I'm not printing them onto the screen, so I'm not really sure that it works. So I need to implement my print vector function. So this function is going to print. Okay, so this is going to go and print all of the doubles that are in the vector onto the screen. So I'm going to go ahead so I don't have to type. It works just like an array. Now, you don't have to do it this way. You could also write the simplified loop that we did in class. But this is the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to keep it simple and understand that a vector is stored like an array with a series of doubles. So I'm going to write a very detailed for loop that starts at index 0, goes up to the size of my vector. Now I can use this dot size function. So if there are 5 items in my vector, it will go up to number 4 because it starts at index 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm going to go one by one through each one, and I'm going to print them onto the screen, and I'm going to print them in a column. The other way to print in a column would be to put end line here. Either one will do the same thing. If you want to do the condensed for loop for this, that's perfectly fine, but I'm going to stick with this for loop that has this initialization, testing, update right here. It's going to go through each double that is in my vector and print it onto the screen. Now, since I can use this size function, I don't need to pass the number here because my vector will know how many elements are in it because of it is a class that has a size function. So let's print it onto the screen. I will pass it my vector. So now I can test it and see if it works. I will build my solution. All right, how many? 12. All right, and it prints the 12 onto the screen. This line right here is just to separate. I can do it again. I can say I want to put -10. It shouldn't allow me. I can say I want to put 42, 43. Okay, so I'm satisfied that it's working as expected. So my next function is going to be the sort function. So my sort function is going to make a copy. So we're not going to pass the vector and modify it. We're going to pass the vector, but our function itself is going to make a copy. Oops, this should be down here. Ugh. Should be down here with my function definitions. All right, so how are we going to do the sort? You can go back here to the assignment instructions. I have given you some things here. Like here is making sure that you use the pushback to push to add them each one separately, one by one to the vector. And this is the way that I'm choosing to loop through the vector. And here is how you can sort your vector. So we can just start at if your vector has a begin and it has an end, and this sort function is part of the pound include algorithm. I think we use the reverse function with our strings, so this is the same kind of idea. So it's very straightforward. We can just go here, and here is our sort vector code. So let's take a look at it. We have our sort values. We're going to start at the beginning, and then we're going to, now keep in mind, we're going to be sorting a copy of our bit values. So when this function gets called, this might not be like every assignment in here. This might not be the most effective way to do things, the most streamlined way to do things. It's a way to understand what's going on. We are not passing by reference, we are passing by copy. We're passing a copy of our bit values function, our bit values vector. Sort values is going to make its own copy. Sort vector is going to make its own copy. The name of that is sort values, sorted values, whatever you want to name it. So it's going to take its copy right here, sort it, and then reuse the print values function to print the sorted uh, numbers onto the screen in a column. So we're just um, practicing and understanding how when you pass a vector to a function, it makes a copy. It's not like an array. If this was an array and you passed it by reference and then you sorted it, it would be also modified. Or if you passed it by reference like we did in the fill vector function, it would also change things. But since it's making its own copy here, it's just making a copy and then printing it onto the screen. So now we're going to test it and make sure that it works as expected. And I'm not sure what happened. Oh, I have already set up that. So it thinks that I had two copies of this function definition. All right, so let's try again. I want to get 12 from the file. So now you will see that it printed the 12 numbers that I got from the file, and then it printed them in sorted order. So I'm printing them from smallest to biggest. I'm saying to sort the values, use dot begin and dot end. So it's very straightforward and easy to use these features once you have a vector. And then our last function now is just going to be to calculate see what this does. We have two functions. We have calculate the average and we have count the values. So just like in our other assignment, we're going to calculate the average of all of the numbers that are greater than. So I think you did less than before, all the numbers that are greater than a value. So let's take a look what happens. In this function, we're going to ask and get a value. We're going to count and print the number of doubles in the vector that are greater than that value. And we're going to save all of those numbers into a new vector. Again, this is practicing, and print that new vector onto the screen. Just like you did in assignment 6, you had your count values function, you got a value, you created a new dynamic array with those values. So the same way we did that, now we're going to create a new dynamic vector with those values, and then we're going to calculate the average of those values. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the calculate average. Calculate average is very similar to our other assignment. The only thing that's different here is you just use the size. But once you have your array of doubles, so just like in our assignment 6, to calculate the average, you just passed your array and the number of elements in the array, and you went one by one through the elements. You added them together, you got the result, and then the average would be the sum divided by the size. Same thing here. We get the size. So we don't need to use an additional variable for the size. We can just continue to use the size function. You just make a loop that starts at the beginning, goes through one by one. Be sure that you initialize sum to 0. You add them all up, just like it is an array. You can use the square brackets, and that's how you calculate the average. And the count values is going to be very similar too. The difference is we're going to be using you're going to ask the user for the value. Then we're going to create a new vector that is going to store those values. So this is the size of our original vector. So we're going to go through it, and then if the value is greater than the value that was entered, if it's equal, it doesn't count, it must be greater than, then we don't have to put this part, but I just like to put it for completeness. And then we're going to use the pushback function to put it into our new vector. This is our new vector. And then we're going to say how many there are because we have this size function. And then we're going to print it, and then we're going to calculate the average of that. So hopefully this helps you. This will be very good for preparing for your final exam because this makes you have to refer back to your assignment 6, hopefully, and also work on assignment 9. And part 1 of assignment 9 uses strings a little bit more with strings and character arrays. So that helps you also maybe you'll refer back to assignment 7 as well on your string. So the best way, just work on this one thing at a time, test each function, and make sure that it works before moving on to the next one.